Welcome to my podcast. To begin with, I'm not a professional podcaster. I'm not even what you might call an amateur podcaster. This is my first podcast ever. I am a dad, and I'm creating this podcast to rescue my vulnerable daughter from a situation of significant safeguarding risk and coercive control. I need to warn other parents, especially those with children who have special educational needs. We do not want anyone else to experience what we have. This podcast won't be slick or polished, but it will be heartfelt and tell the truth that needs to be shared. So welcome to the first episode of When Safeguarding Fails, the Lizzie Gladwell Crisis. I'm Jeremy Gladwell, and today we begin a journey into a story that no parent ever wants to tell. It's the story of how our daughter Lizzie, a vulnerable young adult with special educational needs, was taken from our home, isolated from everyone who loves her, and exploited by those who never should have been trusted. This podcast isn't just about telling our story. It's also about exposing the shocking failures of the systems designed to protect the most vulnerable amongst us. It highlights the indifference and negligence of local statutory agencies, such as the police and adult social care, who have stood by as our daughter was manipulated and exploited. Worse, they have been complicit in Lizzie's isolation and control. My hope is that by sharing Lizzie's story, I can shed light on the dangers that many families face when safeguarding fails. I want to provide a warning to other parents. So whether you're a parent, a professional, or simply someone who cares about justice, hear the story of Lizzie Gladwell. Over the coming episodes, I will unpack the details of how this crisis unfolded, the impact it has had on our family, and what needs to change to ensure that no other family has to go through what we have. Thank you for joining me. So, let's begin. 21st of July 2023. This was Friday, the day after our daughter Lizzie turned 18. It was Lizzie's last day of the summer term at Linkage College in Grimsby for young people with special educational needs. We were slightly uneasy about the day, if I'm honest, because a couple of weeks earlier her boyfriend Lewis had been overheard bragging in class that as soon as Lizzie turned 18, he and his mother were going to take her away to live with them. The college had informed us of this possibility, considering it a safeguarding concern. Alarmed by this information, I'd spoken with Lizzie about it, and she assured me that it was all just talk and nonsense, and that she had told Lewis in no uncertain terms that it was not going to happen. Nonetheless, we were understandably worried, given the level of Lizzie's cognitive and functional difficulties. I won't go into what her difficulties were at this stage. Jane, my wife, had asked a solicitor for advice on where we stood, in case the plan was more than bluff. The solicitor assured Jane that, as Lizzie's officially designated carer, she had the right to insist on a necessary delay if she reasonably believed Lizzie lacked the capacity to make a particular decision. This could apply if Jane felt that Lizzie needed more time or support to understand the consequences of a specific decision, such as where to live. This was entirely consistent with the Mental Capacity Act. The solicitor believed that if an attempt were made to remove a vulnerable young person such as Lizzie from the security and familiarity of the family home, we would simply need to state this legal position to the relevant agencies. Those agencies would then act to safeguard Lizzie's interest and uphold the principles of the Mental Capacity Act. That all seemed reasonable. Nonetheless, as a precaution, we asked the college to ensure that Lizzie got into the transport taxi at the end of the day, just in case Lewis and his mother intended to take Lizzie directly from the college. You can imagine our relief then when, at the usual time, at just after 4:30, the taxi pulled up onto our driveway. I was working in my home office, and I heard Jane exclaim, "Yes, she's home." Jane grabbed a bottle of wine from the kitchen to give to the taxi driver to thank him for his professional and courteous service throughout the year, and she hurried outside to catch him before he drove off. It was fortunate that she did. The next thing I heard was Jane shouting my name with great urgency. "Jeremy!" I jumped from my office chair with a start and hurried outside. By this time, Jane was stood on the pavement opposite our bungalow, clinging on to Lizzie. On the other side of Lizzie, a dishevelled figure loitered. Lewis, Lizzie's boyfriend, wearing his trademark dirty orange fleece. Lizzie's taxi was still idling on our driveway, the driver waiting and watching the unfolding drama with silent concern, unsure of what to do. Passing the taxi, I crossed the street. Lizzie was struggling, but Jane held fast, a testament to her mother's resolve, even as Lizzie squirmed, attempting to break free. It was even more impressive, given that Jane also happened to still be holding the bottle of wine. "Give this to Terry," Jane said, thrusting the bottle into my hands. "It's a thank you." I relieved her of the bottle, recrossed the street and approached Terry, who had rolled down his window. He asked what was happening, concerned. "An attempted abduction," I replied, "but there's nothing more you can do here. Thank you for everything. Enjoy your summer holidays." With a gesture of thanks, Terry accepted the wine and drove off, leaving me to return to the developing situation. Jane was still holding on to Lizzie, who was trying to pull free. Nearby, in the protective confines of her car, sat Coral, Lewis's mother and the orchestrator of this premeditated plot. Her demeanour was cold and detached as she waited. There was something unmistakably predatory about the situation, and it finally dawned on me that Coral had prearranged with Lizzie for her to get out of the taxi, cross the road, get into Coral's car, and leave with them, her only possessions being the clothes she was wearing. Lewis sought to goad Jane. "You're not a mother," he taunted. You're a bully and a tyrant." He added that they were rescuing Lizzie from us. "We need to call the police," I said. A voice came from the car. "I'm already calling them." In fact, Coral had connected to 999 the moment she saw Jane emerging from the house. Good, I thought. How on earth did Coral and Lewis think they could just show up and drive off with our daughter, without any word or warning? My mind raced with questions. Who calls the police immediately unless they have sinister intentions? Not only was this plot being executed by Coral and Lewis, but one of Lewis's younger brothers had been brought along to enjoy the spectacle. Why bring a child along to witness such a thing as this? Plainly, the police would turn up, advise them that this was a foolish course of action, and that would be that, or so we presumed. A precarious agreement was reached between Jane and Lizzie that Jane would let go of her, provided Lizzie stayed away from Coral's car. Inside the car, Coral was speaking to the operator in the police control room. They asked to speak to me. The passenger door was open, and Coral was talking to them on the in-car phone speaker. I briefly considered getting into the car beside the woman who intended to drive off with our daughter. but that seemed highly inappropriate. Moreover, the seat, footwell and central area of the front seats were littered with biscuit crumbs, broken crisps and various empty wrappers. I reluctantly leaned into the car, actually apologising to Coral for being within her car's space. I said hello and was asked to say who I was and what my interpretation was of what was happening. I introduced myself to the unseen voice on the phone and clarified that I was Lizzie's dad. What is happening here, I said, is in essence an abduction of our daughter. Lizzie turned 18 only yesterday, but she has significant special educational needs and a confirmed diagnosis of FASD, which means that she has neurological impairment and cognitive delay. She may be 18 in physical age, but she is far from being 18 when it comes to her understanding and awareness. What is FASD? The voice asked. It stands for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder, I said. Lizzie's birth mother drank while pregnant. We adopted Lizzie when she was a small baby. FASD is a form of brain damage where different functional abilities are impacted to different degrees. Lizzie has a formal diagnosis, and that shows that many of her functional levels are several years behind her actual age. Okay, said the operator, go on. Mrs. Wilson Clark has been waiting outside of our home for Lizzie's return on the last day of term. If my wife had not been bringing a bottle of wine out for the taxi driver, Coral would simply have driven off with our daughter. All of the arrangements for this event had been made while Lizzie was under 18, still legally a child. The operator took some further details before advising us that a police car was on its way. With a sigh of relief, I moved away from the car, back to my wife and daughter, bypassing the orange presence of the scrawny boyfriend nearby. Jane had let go of Lizzie on the condition that Lizzie would not attempt to head anywhere near the car. With the police on their way, we waited in the eerie stalemate. Throughout it all, Coral never once got out of the car. She just sat there, silent yet radiating an unsettling smugness. Eventually the police car arrived. 2 male officers from Lincolnshire Police approached. One appeared to be in his 40s, showing a degree of experience, while the other was younger, with a tendency to smirk. The older officer asked what was going on. I explained, describing the event as being tantamount to abduction. "I'm not abducting her," wafted a brash voice from the car. "It's her own choice." The policeman turned to Lizzie and asked for her name. She told him. "So, Lizzie, how old are you?" he asked. "I'm 18, she answered. "She was 18 yesterday," Jane and I said in unison. "And what do you want to do?" the policeman asked. "I want to go with them," Lizzie said, pointing to the car. The officer explained that since Lizzie was over the age of 18, she was considered to be an adult in the eyes of the law, and therefore capable of making her own decisions, even if we happened to disagree with them. Furthermore, given that he had spoken to her and asked for her age and decision, and that she had responded with clarity, he judged that she had sufficient capacity not to warrant further assessment. "Hang on a minute," I said. "This is ridiculous. Lizzie has got an EHCP which states that she's a vulnerable child, well, a vulnerable adult now, but that plan states explicitly that her learning difficulties make her extremely susceptible to manipulation. She has a formal FASD diagnosis, which clearly indicates her mental age is at least 5 or 6 years behind her physical age. She attends Linkage College, a specialist college for young people with learning difficulties. Lizzie is essentially a child in an adult's body." Jane reinforced the argument. As Lizzie's primary carer, she said, under the Mental Capacity Act 2005, I have the right to say that she does not have the capacity to truly understand the implications of what's going on here. You cannot seriously let a vulnerable young person just go off with people who have absolutely no idea about her needs. We fielded the inevitable question about what FASD is. The officer wrongly concluded that it was a bit like autism, and told us that he had a son with autism who was in his 20s, as though that suddenly made him an expert on a disorder he had not even heard of 5 minutes earlier. The conversation returned to the immediate situation. "Do you have a court of protection order on her?" asked the policeman. "No," we said. "It didn't seem appropriate. We didn't want to take decision-making power from her." We had made the reasoned decision not to pursue the option of applying for court of protection for Lizzie, because, like most parents of children with special needs, we wanted to help Lizzie make wise choices, not snatch away what precious little autonomy she had. "Then she is legally an adult," the older policeman said, while the younger one failed to suppress a smirk. "She was 18 yesterday," I protested, and so legally," interjected the officer, "she has the right to choose." I stated that this was a situation of significant safeguarding risk, as a clinically diagnosed vulnerable adult was being taken from her home and family to live with strangers the moment she turned 18. The officer hinted at being sympathetic to our plight, recommending that we raise our concerns with social services if we believed this presented a safeguarding issue. Despite our protests, despite our attempts to convey the complexity of Lizzie's condition, despite us citing the stipulations of the Mental Capacity Act as advised by the solicitor, the officer reinforced his point with unambiguous clarity, saying, "If you try to keep her here, we will have no choice but to arrest you for false imprisonment." In tearful disbelief, Jane and I hugged Lizzie, each giving her a reassuring and loving squeeze. This was not her doing. There was an evident plot in play here, with Lizzie having been persuaded of a life of excitement and independence. Rooted in bewilderment and disbelief, we stood and watched as our precious Lizzie got into the car. Suddenly Jane became animated. "Hold on," she exclaimed, and dashed across the road to enter our house. Moments later she reappeared with a book. It was one of the birthday gifts we had given to Lizzie the previous day, a photo book chronicling the development of our baby into the beautiful young woman she was becoming. Jane handed the book to Coral. Coral passed it back to Lizzie, gave a final smug look, and drove away. In that moment, our daughter was ripped from our care, with only the clothes she was wearing from her day at college, and her college bag, which contained her empty pack-up bag and a water bottle. Shell-shocked, we retreated into our home. Some packages were on the doorstep. While we had been remonstrating with the police, an Amazon delivery van had stopped near our house, and the driver left some packages. We had noticed him, but we were so preoccupied that it had not crossed our minds to call out and inquire if the parcels were addressed to Lizzie. However, that is exactly what they were. Gifts that arrived just a day after her birthday. But it was too late, for Lizzie was gone. That evening, Jane's sobs echoed the depth of our despair and bewilderment. Our precious daughter, barely an adult, had been swept into a situation beyond her comprehension, and all of our lives were to be forever altered. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of When Safeguarding Fails, the Lizzie Gladwell Crisis. If you found it moving or helpful, or if you think our story could help others, then please like, share, or simply tell others about it. Thank you again, and join me for the next episode.